We have two presentations tonight, and in an honor of, in an effort to keep them both at the front of the agenda and to be respectful of their time, I'm thinking if they would both come up together. Liz Hennessy from William Blair is the underwriter from William Blair, is our district's debt service underwriter and consultant, and she's going to be presenting on the life safety. And then we'll turn it over to, once she's complete, we'll turn it over to Carrie Matlock, the architect from DLA, who will present on our life safety amendment. The life safety amendment is what we discussed about a month ago at our board meeting. The state of the school board has to approve it first before Carrie can take it to the state to get formal approval. And if she gets formal approval from the state on the amendment, then we can go through Ms. Hennessy to purchase life safety bonds to finance the projects that we need to complete in regards to life safety. So, Liz, whenever you're ready.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having me tonight. Nice to see you again. First, I'm going to start with a market update, and we'll apologize. This is as of June 30th, because we wanted to make sure you had the presentations in your board packet, so it doesn't include what's happened this week so far. But a couple of notable things. On page 1, we've got the blue line is the AAA Municipal Market Data Index for bonds with an average life of 20 years. And you can see over the last 5 years where we priced the District Series 2015 A and B bonds. That was refunding of some of the 2006 B bonds. We also see Brexit, where we hit a low point last July of 2016 when Britain chose to exit the European Union, really kind of throwing the economy on its ear for the European economy and bringing interest rates down worldwide. Then we come to November of 2016, the U.S. presidential election, where President Trump won. And interest rates went up the fastest we've ever seen them go up in the shortest period of time. And much of that was in anticipation of his policies that were expected to increase GDP, increase inflation, and increase productivity here in the U.S. To the extent that really hasn't happened, as many of his policies have not come to fruition yet, the market kind of traded down in January. Interest rates came down a bit. Then we had a Fed rate hike in March and another Fed rate hike in June, where you see the rates come up a little bit. We also in June had an unemployment report that was unfavorable. Just this past week we had a more favorable, as of June 30th, a more favorable employment report, so rates kind of pop up. So as is typical, good news is bad news for the bond market, and bad news economically is good news for the bond market, because it means the Fed's going to keep rates low, and that makes the municipal market follows the Fed funds and the Treasury market. So let's go to the next page and look at the yield curve. So this shows interest rates not for the 10 or the 20 year, but for every point on the curve from year 1 through year 30. So we look at these 6 yield curves, and the green line is where we are now. And if we look at the short end of the yield curve on that green line, you can see that around year 1, that short-term rate is almost up to 1%, the highest we've seen over these past 6 years, which is a result of the Fed increasing the Fed funds rate. So that's where the impact is. But interestingly, if you go out further into years 10 and out to year 20 through 30, we're kind of the second lowest we've been in this period of time since 2010. So what that tells me is it's still a good time to borrow. Good time to issue bonds. Interest rates are low compared to the last 6 years. So just some market commentary. I won't bother reading each of these, but this was as of June 30th. So, even though we did have a rate increase in June, because of that kind of bad unemployment result, the Fed was most people were betting the Fed's only going to raise rates one more time this year in December. So that's a good thing, should keep our rates pretty low and steady. So you can see Fed Chair Yellen and Vice Chairman Fisher reaffirmed the fourth quarter rate hike. The Bank of England and the European Central Bank talked about tightening measures with regard to raising rates, so they're starting to talk about that. And also the thing that everybody's looking at is the unwinding of the U.S. purchase of Treasury bonds, that quantitative easing where our federal government bought a lot of bonds in the open market is something that they're going to start selling some of those bonds and lightening up their book of debt that way. So that's also something that's expected to make fixed income interest rates go up. But so we'll see how that plays in. But then the big thing that's here in Illinois, as you I'm sure have been watching carefully, is what has happened with our budget. And as of June 30th, we had a Senate override of the governor's veto of the budget, but we did not yet have the House override, which of course you know did occur. So that is good. And we actually saw the state of Illinois bonds rally, meaning rates went lower on those in the secondary market. So that was a good thing. We're still not out of the woods, as you well know. We're waiting to hear what's going to happen with Senate Bill 1, which was the funding mechanism for schools to receive state aid. So that's in the budget, despite the fact the governor has said he's going to veto it. So waiting to see on that. And as this, hopefully this plan, this budget that has been approved gets implemented, we'll see some relief for some of our state agencies. The backlog of bills get paid down, and most of all, avoid a credit rating downgrade into the junk category. That's what we're certainly hoping for. So that's good news for you, even though you have the second highest credit rating below AAA as a school district. You're a AA plus, so very strong bond rating. You do reside in the state of Illinois, so that has an impact on the interest rates you receive. But you know, I think the less dependent a district is on state funding, and the stronger it's able to keep its own bond rating, the better you're going to fare in the interest rate market. So that's really good for you. So going into the financing plan.
Can we,
yes, sir.
Could you take a step back and because there's 3 new people on the board, so they didn't go through our refinancing before. And then secondly, we have the public out there, and maybe we just need to give a brief overview of life safety and what kind of burden it puts on a district once you identify a life safety issue, and the reason why you're even here talking to us about what we can do to not burden the taxpayers
Sure.
with this life safety issue. So
Sure.
maybe.
So, and that's really a perfect segue into this page 5. So the district has 2 types of bonds. You have life safety bonds and other bonds that do not go to the voters for referendum. And you have referendum approved bonds. Most recently are the 2006 and 2007 that were pursuant to a referendum at that time. The 2006 bonds were refunded 2 years ago at their call date and saved the taxpayers over the life of those bonds approximately $2 million. We now have the opportunity to refund the 2007 bonds, which were also issued pursuant to that referendum authority. And I'm going to show you some savings based on current market, and there are really strong savings. The call date on those bonds is December 1 of 2017, and we can refund them within 90 days of that call date. So we're coming up quickly to that window, August and September, when we should think about refunding those, because again, we're talking about some significant savings to the taxpayers. The thing that we also want to talk about is life safety bonds. So if you look at page 5, right in the middle of the page, you see the non-referendum current DSEB. DS is for debt service. And it's about $1 million a year. That's a principal and interest that the district is currently paying off for existing health life safety bonds.
And so the board and the community understands the school district is required to do a health and life safety inspection every 10 years. And your architect and engineer, district architect of record and engineer will come through and they do a life safety inspection. That's why Carrie's here. She did that for the district in 2013. They identify items and label them as A, B, and C. Items A are urgent and you have 1 year to complete those repairs. B items are items that need to be completed within 5 years. And items C, items that are labeled with a C are considered borderline life safety or capital improvement, but they're not required to be completed within the 10 years, correct?
They are required if you ask for money.
If you ask for money for them.
Yes, absolutely.
Correct.
They're
Most of the
recommended.
items that are on life safety reports that the state allows life safety bonds to be issued for would be replacing buildings if there's major safety infractions like we had with our old bleachers where the concrete was falling on students and the bathrooms were unusable and they're not ADA compliant. Our bleachers in the main gym, roofs,
Correct.
asphalt, concrete, tripping hazards, fire hazards,
Fire
those
hazards.
electrical hazards, those type of issues. So you couldn't come in and say, hey, we want to refurbish the auditorium seats. That's not really a life safety item.
Correct.
And so these are items that the state deems, mandated repairs to keep a school up to occupancy standards. Good definition?
That's fair.
Okay. So we have roughly $2 million that Carrie will talk about in her presentation of life safety work that still needs to be addressed. Correct?
Yes, would you like?
And, no, we'll go to that in a second. So Liz is here to discuss, we probably should have did the life safety work first, but then have Liz talk about how to finance it. Is that what you prefer? Does the board prefer that? Or do we want to have Liz continue?
Okay.
Let Liz continue. Sorry, Liz.
No problem. That's all good background, though, because, when we refunded the bonds in 2015 for savings, we, at the same time, issued those life safety bonds, and the impact on the taxpayers wasn't nearly as great because it was offset by the savings on the bonds that we refunded in 2015. We have that opportunity to kind of do the same thing again, where we've got savings, but if you need to issue more life safety bonds, like it sounds like Carrie's going to talk about, there's ways that the taxpayers will not be affected. So let's go to the graph. I think the graph helps. The green bars are the life safety debt service payments, and you see they just are paid off in 2021. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is the blue line. The blue line is called the debt service extension base, and that's the maximum amount the district can pay off each year for non-referendum bonds like life safety bonds, or working cash is another type of this bond. So you can issue those bonds as long as the payments don't go over just under $2 million a year. That line tilts slightly upward because you can apply a CPI factor to it each year, which makes it grow a bit. But under the tax cap, you can't pay off more than that $1.8 million a year. The dark blue lines represent the principal and interest paid off on bonds approved by the voters. So those do not have a limitation. But when those were issued in 2005, 2006, and 2007, you can see the final maturity on those is 2026. The payments are about the same, and you're, getting near to the end of those bonds that were approved by the voters. So once those are paid off, they're done. Unless you go back to the voters for another referendum, the taxes for those bonds will fall off. Okay, so let's go to the next page. As I mentioned, we've got the opportunity to refund the 2007 B bonds. And so let me just review the options I'm going to show you. Option 1 is going to be the refunding bonds only, no life safety or no working cash bonds, and this impact on the taxpayers just from the refunding. Then we're going to look at the refunding issue plus $2 million of life safety bonds issued at the same time. The idea of issuing them at the same time is that you have lower cost of issuance. So you're just doing one issue for two purposes, and that helps saves a little bit on the cost. And what you'll see when we issue $2 million of bonds for life safety, there's really no tax increase. In fact, there'll be a bit of a decrease. Option 3A is issue the refunding bonds plus 2 million life safety bonds and 3 million of working cash fund bonds. It doesn't have to be working cash fund bonds, but working cash fund bonds can be issued to do other capital projects also paid within that DSEB, that debt service extension base under the tax cap, but can be very useful to get capital projects done that may not qualify for health life safety. And then option 3B is the same thing, but they're paid off a little quicker. So I'll get into the nuances in those two options in a minute. So let's go to page 8. Starting on the left-hand side of the page, there's that debt service extension base, that 1.8 million of non-referendum bonds that you can pay off each year. We know CPI for 2017 is going to be 2.1%, and we've assumed in the future 1.5%. So we're trying to be conservative. We know the Fed wants CPI at 2%, and we can change that assumption as we go forward. Then we've got the current life safety debt service, the $1 million a year that's paid off in 2021. And that is taken away from that debt service extension base, leaving remaining debt service capacity each year of about $750,000. And then it grows. Once those bonds are paid off, the life safety bonds, it jumps up to $1.9 million. And you can go out a maximum of 20 years. One thing we've talked about in the past that we think is a good practice is to keep the bonds issued under this debt service extension base relatively short. Why? You have a lower interest cost, and you want to make sure that if you need to go back to that debt service extension base again for some emergency life safety or something, that you have the flexibility to do so. So that's the remaining capacity. That's the space under that blue line we just saw.
Mayor,
Next.
can you scroll that slide up a little bit so the community can see the bottom
Yeah.
box? That's important.
It is. So next, we've got the remaining referendum debt service, and the savings from refunding the 2007 portion of this is just under $3 million of savings over the life of these bonds, 10 years, to the taxpayers. So that is extremely strong savings, and it shows that our rates are still low, and it's a wonderful opportunity. The money can only go back to the taxpayers through the debt service levy. There's no way that savings can be redirected in any way to district operating funds. So that is 2.6 million in terms of present value savings, and we look at this ratio, the present value savings as a percent of refunded bonds, it's 12%. So that's a really strong ratio. We want that to be north of 5, and it's double that.
I'm sorry, I lost you the last 20 seconds.
Okay, so
Where's the present value on here?
if you go under the column that says savings from proposed refunding bonds, the 2.9 million, and
Okay,
if we
I
take,
see, right.
So
Yep.
so maybe for, again, the current, those referendum bonds, what kind of interest rate do they currently have?
around 4.75%.
And you use an assumption of what, 2.5? Is that?
Yes. That's what we're looking
So,
at.
right, or, so that's
Correct.
the reason we're getting savings is the differential in the interest rates if we were to refinance it right now.
Exactly right.
Almost 2 percentage point differential in savings. Okay.
Correct.
On 43, that's 40, what is it, 43 million of debt, or is it, which side do we look at, 46 or the 40?
You look at the 46 is what you
40.
had before, minus the 2.9
Yeah.
million,
All
leaves
right,
you with
so
about
40
43 now.
44 million of debt,
Mhm.
okay. So that's where the savings coming from.
That's the savings,
Yep,
exactly.
the interest rate differential. All right.
So as you see, we're just taking the savings in equal amounts each year. We're not shortening up the bonds, and we're not stretching them out any longer. Just keeping the
Right.
repayment schedule exactly the
Right.
same.
And if we didn't have life safety issues where we needed to fund it, but we do have life safety issues, you would recommend going and doing this for automatic savings soon as they're callable.
Yep, And
the
I recommend that in any case.
Any case, right. With this
Yeah.
kind of differential, if the differential in interest rates were smaller, but let's not worry about. All right, and
It's
they're
good.
callable December 1st?
Within 3
December
months of the call
1st,
date.
but you can do it 3 months before.
Earlier, right.
So, and because we're looking at a Fed rate hike sometime in December, that's why we would recommend getting into the market in
Right.
September,
Exactly.
October.
All right.
So the 6 million, all the way to the left, non-referendum total, that's the other life safety debt that's out there?
Yes,
So that's why our total debt service is roughly 49,929.
correct.
Okay.
So
your
then,
present value savings as a percentage of refunded bonds, you said 5% is typically a cutoff that you use?
3 to 5%.
3 to 5? And
Correct.
so we're at 12%?
So it's really strong.
Really strong.
Yeah, really strong.
Okay, so, I mean, although option one explains all that to the taxpayer, it's not necessarily realistic for the district's needs, because we know we have life safety
So,
needs.
so what, and you're showing here on a
$300,000 home.
home, how
It's,
much tax savings
Yeah.
annually do they have?
over the life of the bonds, it's about $359. And it's about $36 a year, so that's on a $300,000 market value.
Over 10 years, it would save a $300,000 home, $360.
Yes.
Right.
Mhm. The other thing I want to point out here, and it's in that second bullet, is that in 2026, the debt service that was approved by referendum goes to 0. So that's going to be a 55-cent tax rate decrease, and that equates to a $500 savings on that same $300,000 home. So the end is near. And page 9 is a graphic of option 1, the savings alone. And the gray bars on the top represent the amount of savings that you recognize in those levy years. Okay, so this is just the savings alone. So the next two options, we're going to keep that refunding the same, and we're going to look at adding life safety in option 2. So let's go to page 10. So if we start on the left side of the page,
Keep going, Mayor.
yeah, thanks.
A little more, just so they can see the bottom,
There you go.
right there.
All right, so the 2 million proposed life safety bonds are shown on the left side of the page, and we're paying those off over 7 years. That's the same period of time we paid off the prior bonds. It's $2 million, and the debt service, the new debt service, is about $315,000 a year. And so what happens is that increase is offset by the savings from the refunding, which is just under $300,000 a year. So that if we look at the net tax increase or decrease to the taxpayer, it's 0 in terms of rate. It's $1 or $2, you know, for the taxpayer, so really negligible. But after the life safety bonds are paid off in 2024, then you're back to your $36 a year. So this option, net, refunding plus the new life safety, saves the taxpayer only $93 over those same years. Again, because the savings on the refunding is soaked up a bit by the new life safety bond issue for $2 million.
But it's still a savings,
Right.
correct?
Correct.
So for the first 7 years, if we issue the 2 million, the taxpayer will see a $2 increase the first year, $2 increase second year, $1.88, $2.
Yeah, they're not,
Minimum.
it's going to be minuscule, yeah.
And then in the last 3 years, they start seeing the 36.
Correct.
And that decrease of the 55-cent decrease still starts after 2026.
Yes, that's the same on all of these options.
So to be fair to the taxpayer, right, if we didn't go with the life safety bonds, and with these two differentials, it's actually a $37 or $38 differential year one, a $39 differential year two, blah, 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 because they would have saved $35 or $36. Now we're telling them we need life safety bonds, so you're not going to get that savings, plus you get another $2, right?
Right. But you will still get them just a
I mean,
few years
overall, we're
down.
saying 3
Yeah.
was almost $400 savings, you're saving 100, so the differential's 300 over the life of the whole 10 years.
Yeah.
Right.
So page 11 looks at a graphic of that. So here, if you look at the bottom, those light blue bars, that's the debt service from that new 2 million life safety. The gray bars again represent the savings on the top, so you can see net, there's really, if you go to the top of the blue bars, very little change in what people would see on their tax bill. Okay, let's go to option 3. So option 3 is the 2 million life safety and 3 million working cash. This is a longer payback. It's a longer payback because the attempt is to try to keep this tax neutral to the taxpayer. Okay, so you can see in the middle of the page, we've got 3 million working cash and 2 million life safety. And just to review, working cash is very flexible. It goes into the working cash fund and then can be transferred to the O&M fund and the capital projects fund to complete capital projects that may or may not qualify for life safety. So,
So an example, where I had Liz pull this up, is the board has discussed briefly, and we were going through the building of the tennis courts in Rockefeller, and even during the settlement agreement and the discussions with the village of Brookfield, at some point, the board was going to try to look into negotiating a long-term deal with Cook County in order to get the fields back just north of the school, so that we can have, be a public high school that has access to a girls' softball field, a boys' baseball field, an auxiliary soccer field, a field for PE, and so that we're not spread throughout the community at different parks and different locations. So the reason I had Liz put this on here, by no means is the administration ready to make a recommendation on this tonight, but I wanted to make sure the board understood all their options. And even as I'm sitting listening to Liz, I'm writing a few notes because I want to ask a couple questions at the end. But with our bond rating being so high and interest rates being so low, the board should make sure they consider the opportunity of, is it smarter to do life safety bonds? Is it smarter to do a combination of life safety and working cash bonds, so that we have this money available at a time when the county is struggling and coming up with soda taxes and different things to raise revenues? We might be able to say to them, we're willing to do a long-term license for the fields and eliminate them parking cars on the fields and allow us to run high school programs on our campus, or right next door to our campus, instead of having to drive and bus kids to tennis courts and baseball fields and soccer fields and Brookfield, North Riverside, big ballpark, Indian Gardens. We're kind of all over the place. And that was one of our issues of trying to build some parking and tennis. And so it's something we would need to consider. There are some parameters if we were to do these working cash bonds to address capital projects. We would have to spend that money within
you have to expect to spend it within 3 years.
Within 3 years. And so it's something that the board should consider. And so the reason I asked Liz is to just try to figure out, the goal here is to little or no impact on the taxpayers. And so if we just do the 2 million life safety, we'll address our needs. If an opportunity came up with the zoo or with the county, we would then have to just tap into our reserves, which at this point, you know, we're over the recommended 33% fund balance, but we're not exactly flush with cash, with possible pension shifts and cost, property tax freezes still being out there and things like that, and a budget that we're discussing tonight that's starting to show a deficit. So I don't know if that's the best option. And so the reason I had Liz put this out there was, as she said, we're looking at a 12% savings with our debt service that it may be the right time to look at 2 or 3 million in working cash. And the question I had written down, Liz, is it an option for the board? Is the interest rate much different if instead of doing the life safety, what if we did 3 million or 4 million in just working cash and used it to address all the life safety issues plus any other cap? I mean, is,
No different.
you know,
The bonds, whether they're life safety or working cash, are issued with the security of the debt service extension base. And as long as the payments are within that, they're considered a general obligation bond. So the security is the same, whether it's life safety or working cash. You have different processes for approval, however. The process for approving life safety, and Carrie will talk more about this, is to prepare the life safety amendments, have the Cook Regional Office and this Illinois State Board of Education approve those amendments before you can be authorized to issue the bonds. With working cash bonds, you have instead a limit, which you have lots of flexibility with regard to your working cash limit. But you also have a procedure called a petition period and a public hearing required. The petition period involves the board approving a resolution of intent to issue working cash bonds. The notice of that intent is published in the newspaper. That begins a 30-day petition period. And if within 30 days 10% of the registered voters would submit a petition, that would cause the issue to go to referendum. Life safety bonds, on the other hand, simply require the approval of the amendments and a public hearing. But the proceeds are restricted only for life safety approved projects.
correct.
They could not be used for the parking, the zoo issue.
Right. So it's not a parking issue, so we'll make sure that's clear. What the board has discussed briefly, and it started with the previous board and the current board has expressed interest in exploring, is trying to get the district's students on or near its campus and stop
Perfect.
spreading them throughout the community. Not that we have an issue, we have great intergovernmental agreements, we're doing things with our different park districts, but, you know, for a student to not have played a home softball game once on their campus and had to be in a park district, or junior varsity soccer or freshman soccer, I mean, some of those things could be addressed. If we could figure out a way to, the talks that broke down, which I know this was explained at the village board meeting, there were talks that the school district front money to the county to expand their gravel parking lot behind the fields in exchange so that they would stop parking on the fields and the school district could use those fields for extracurricular activities and for physical education classes and school activities. Those talks have not restarted, but, you know, do we do this, do we pursue those talks while we have an opportunity to borrow money at a really low rate, you know, and not tap into the district's reserves? So that was the reason I had Liz do this.
But the question comes is that with the lack of success we've had for the past 6 years trying to work with the zoo on negotiating some kind of land deal, what happens if 3 years from now we're still in a hold situation with the zoo? What happens with that $3 million?
Well,
Do we have to pay back the bonds?
no, you can use it.
Right.
Right?
Sorry?
You can only pay $1.8 million, right?
You can you're paying them back $1.8 million a year, no more than that.
Right.
But if you don't spend the money on what you intended to because things change, you weren't
Right.
successful in your negotiation, whatever the case may be, if you have other capital projects, you really have, you know, complete flexibility with regard to what you use that money for. Whether
Working
it-
cash bonds can be used for any purpose, right?
That's right.
The life
No,
safety-
but not these, right? We can't go and switch them over to the education fund.
No, you have to declare that in your resolution, correct?
Correct. So there's two types of working cash bonds. Capital, which we're talking about here, for capital projects. Those may be issued on a tax-exempt basis, and that's what we've shown you options for here. If, on the other hand, let's say we get the tax freeze and the pension shift and your operating funds are pressured and you want to issue working cash bonds simply to help your cash flow, you could do that as well, but that's a different type of bond. It's a taxable working cash bond. And the interest rate is a bit higher on taxable working cash bonds, but that gives you complete flexibility to use it for either operating needs, cash flow, educational purposes, or capital.
So back to the original question, if we don't get a deal with the zoo, if we don't get the parking lot we want.
You mean the
Fields.
land?
Fields, no parking.
No parking, we're good.
What
with parking.
happens,
Yeah, well,
what
if
happens
the
to the
parking lot
3 million?
gone And we get the field.
If your
Let's say
intent,
that's
and we
it.
have to start out with intent. So
Right, our intent was to do
Intent
it.
A is fields, intent B is other capital projects, maybe including additional
Well,
life safety.
all the money that district has been spending on capital for the past 10 years, I think we have a lot of
You'd have a lot of ways to
people
spend.
mad at us saying we're going to create a new capital project for the 3 million. So what happens if we don't have any more capital projects and we have the 3 million sitting there and we don't spend it? What happens?
Well, you can say, I expect to spend it on capital over the next 5 years. If you really don't have any capital to spend it on in the next 5 years, then we should go into it issuing it on a taxable basis in case that happens. That would be the safest thing to
Is there
do.
a portion that you can refund back to the taxpayers?
You can always refund it back to the taxpayers through abating it. So let's say you've got that 3 million, you weren't able to get the deal with the zoo, and now you have nothing else you need it for, you want to give it back to the taxpayers. You abate the debt service tax levy, so instead of the taxpayers paying that up to 1.8 million
would
a
pay it.
year, you pay it with the bond
All
proceeds.
right, so we can abate.
You
can
can
abate.
abate. Mhm.
But you still have the bonds outstanding.
Yeah, and then
They're not callable.
That's
but
right.
we didn't spend the 3 million.
Yeah.
So now we will make the debt service payment as opposed to the property tax receipt coming in to pay it.
So Tim brings up another option, which if 3A, option 3A, looks at bonds that go out 14 years for working cash. So they would, municipal bonds, unlike your home mortgage, are not callable at any time. But they are callable usually 10 years and after, which is why here we are in 2017, we have the opportunity to refund the 2007 bonds. We're at that 10-year mark. So if we went with option A, where you've got the longer payback on the working cash bonds, you'd have a call date around year 9 or 10. So the other option is to take that 3 million and use it to pay off the bonds at the call date. Or we'd set up an escrow at a bank to pay off the bonds before the call date and then after. So then we would be paying off principal and foregoing the interest cost altogether. So that's another way you could use that 3 million if you did not, or if you were not able to get the deal you'd want with the zoo and had no other projects or needs.
So we either abate it or do what you just said.
Yes, either abate or redeem the bonds
Redeem.
at the call date. Mhm.
Liz, so we're in a good situation. From a superintendent to his board, the fact that we have a high bond rating and interest rates that are low, it's almost like refinancing your house a little bit and having a little extra cash so this is a good thing. We're not sitting here where we're having trouble making payroll and are issuing tax anticipation warrants, and then we're looking to do these bonds to just do them.
Let me ask a couple more questions. So I still don't, what is right now, how much more debt capacity do we have? I mean, the first chart puts it in less than $1 million, going up to 2, and we're talking about issuing. If you already did it before I got here.
There's a count.
What page is it?
So,
To the-
let's look at page
No.
13.
Yeah.
And we can look at this graph, because I think it helps graphically to see.
No, is there a chart first? Like the page 1 says the remaining debt capacity.
And that's
Page
without
5.
referendums, so, if you want to go back to page 1.
Is there a chart that shows what our remaining debt capacity is? I mean,
Yes,
table.
pages 8 and 9. So page 8 is the chart, page 9 is the graph.
So
So what we've
fifth
got on the
column.
left-hand side of the page is you're starting, next to the tax years, your debt service extension base. That is the amount of bonds you can pay off a year, principal and interest, without going to the voters for referendum. You've got about 1 million payments on the current life safety bonds that end in 2021. So the column remaining DSEB capacity looks at starting at 750,000 and then going up to 1.9 million after the life safety bonds are paid off. That's your debt service capacity. You can leverage that for up to 20 years if you wanted to. We don't recommend that because that takes your flexibility away.
Convert the 3 million number he did to your chart. That's what I'm not on, every time you do this. Kevin threw out a number of if we issued 3 million in life safety and how much in 3 million in working cash and how much in life safety we're talking about.
2 million.
So how does your chart show me I can issue 5 million in debt?
Page
Okay,
12.
so let's go back to page 12.
Because she's doing a different time frame.
But she spread it over 14 years instead of 17, we stay under the 1.7.
And if you go to the 7-year,
So you look at
page
this here,
14, and you basically lose all your capacity.
we'd have to spread it out to 14 years so that way our payments would stay under 1.7. or
Again, that's showing, is this showing me what my payment capacity is or what my issue?
Payment.
That's, again, I think it's, where does it show I can issue $5 million in bonds?
Well, if we look under the column that says 3 million non-referendum working cash bonds, that's 3 million. You're going to pay back 680,000
So your chart doesn't
of
actually show what our
interest.
debt, our issuing capacity is, it shows what our payment capacity is, and you convert it into how much debt we can issue.
But
Right.
your debt capacity, based on the length of the debt, can be greater or smaller, right?
Right. So
So-
if you look at that column, that
So I
3
could be,
million.
I could be basically at the 5 million if I'm paying it off in only 5 years, but I'm at 7.6 if I pay it off over 7 years, based off of your page 14 chart, right? Because you're hitting max capacity,
Oh, yeah, right.
But then 2 years left, we got another 1 million and another 1.6 million we can use of that capacity. And then if we go to, what's the max you can do under?
20 years.
So then we got another 13 years, or another 12 years of 1 million, almost 2 million a year that we can borrow up to if we have an amortization schedule that went full 20 years.
All right, you just probably lost everybody, including me.
I'll say it in English. So the limitation
The longer you
on what you
borrow,
can
the-
spend
Right.
is based on, the limitation is what you can spend on a debt capacity, which is based on the interest rates and the length of time you issue the debt. So if
Exactly
the
right.
lower the interest rates and the longer you issue the debt, the more debt you can issue.
The more principal you
The
get
more
out of it
principal
for
you-
projects.
okay,
Correct.
Yes.
That's why her
Mhm.
first option A is over 14 years.
Well,
And then to clarify your point, life safety is very rigid. Carrie puts it in, the state approves it, there's a limitation, and actually, there's a limitation that dollar amount issued in debt, but we have to redo the life safety work once we submit it, if they approve it.
Correct.
Carrie? Correct.
Sorry,
If you submit a life safety amendment and the state approves it, we have to do the
Right.
life
Correct.
safety work.
If we borrow the
went
money.
through this.
If
If we
yes,
borrow the
that's-
money.
That's what
When
amendment
we
means.
sat them down, we
Yeah.
made it clear to the district, to the people in Q, that life safety, that they come through every 10 years.
Right.
They identify all the
Explain.
problems with the building.
Okay.
We identified, how much was the total? We didn't give them the total at the time, but it was
10 million.
10 million or 12 million.
Right.
We're now down to the last 3 million. We've
Right.
already cleaned, but once they identify, they have to be done in a certain time frame,
Right.
based on A, B, or C.
We covered,
We
we covered all
with
that for the viewers.
the viewers.
Yeah, but I'm trying to connect it to the debt issuance now, okay, and I understand it. So, once they approve the life safety, we have to do it, whether we borrow money or use it out of our working fund, we have to do the work based on the ABC schedule. So if we approve if the state approved the life safety for 3 million, somehow we have to fund it.
Well, let's back up a
Right?
little bit.
Let me finish my question first, okay? Did I say something that's wrong so far?
Yes, you did.
What did I say that was wrong? She keeps shaking her head and saying yes to me.
Let's everybody take a deep breath. If you submit an amendment and we want a bond for the amendment, we have to do the work. We don't have to submit this amendment tonight if the board says, hey, let's issue 4 million in working cash and that's how we'll pay off the life safety repairs. If
That
the
is
board
correct.
says tonight, so that's where you were wrong, is the board says tonight, hey, instead of going life safety and working cash, why not just take out 4 million in working cash? We can choose to say, we'll take a million of that 4 million and negotiate a deal with the zoo. We'll take another million and address these life safety items, and then we'll have 2 million to address the items that are on this life safety report over the next remaining 10 years of that life safety report till 2023.
Is that correct?
It
Or
is.
if we know there's a life safety, do we have to submit it to the state?
We already have submitted your life safety issues to the state.
Right.
The state has recognized them, and they've acknowledged that you've done your due diligence for the 10-year requirement.
Okay.
The question here on the table is, are you going to fund them with life safety
Okay.
funds? That's what the amendments are for.
All right, well, let me go to, he led into what my second question was going to be. So, but if we do get it approved and we decide to issue, if we submit it, it's approved, and we issue life safety bonds, as long as we have the debt capacity, we can do it. We can issue the bonds. But on working cash bonds, aside from the other things you talked about, isn't there a limitation on how much we can issue in working cash bonds besides our
is.
debt capacity?
There is a separate working cash limit, yes. Talked
Okay.
about that at the beginning. And I'm sorry, I didn't bring that slide, but I'll get it back. I know I've given it to you, Kevin, before, and it's a larger number, so.
It's, do you have a rough, I remember what?
You know what, if you,
Might be able to look through your email while
I'll
Carrie's
get it,
present.
Okay.
I'll get it for you before the end of
Okay.
tonight.
So besides going through a couple other steps to issue working cash bonds, there's more of a limitation than just our debt capacity to issue. I don't know
It's a
what we can issue on
separate
bonds.
statutory
Okay.
limit, and it's based on 85%, the ed fund extension.
Now, whenever you say working cash, don't you have to specify if it's a taxable or non-taxable?
Yes.
Because I don't want to get those mixed up.
Right, and she touched on that. If it's
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
capital, it's non-taxable.
It's absolutely right. Mhm.
But you can use taxable for capital, but you can't use non-taxable for other than capital, is what you said,
You
right?
can't use tax exempt for operational,
Okay.
Correct.
right.
Is-
So there's, the reason that life safety, they have you submit that amendment, it's like a second checks and balance.
Right.
So that if you're gonna go out and do this life safety and purchase these bonds without voter approval, it's like the state's people saying, yes, that work is absolutely needed. It's a
Right.
second level of checks and balance. If we were gonna use the working cash money to use it, and there's some items that Carrie will discuss tonight on her amendments that the state may say, you know, we don't feel that's a life safety amendment, or we don't feel that, but if our pool dehumidifier breaks within the next 5 years,
And it's a
how do we
life
pay
safety
for it?
issue, right.
You know? So that's where the flexibility of using the working cash capital could come in.
You said the tax exempt bonds can go to operations or not?
Not, they
Does not
cannot go.
Pure capital.
Pure capital,
I thought
correct.
you said they can go to operations and maintenance.
Well, if you have capital items in your operation and maintenance budget, you can use tax exempt working cash for that, but you can't pay for the operational part of your O&M fund expenditures. So, like,
If we were doing a repair
know,
to a piece of equipment
custodians
that's not
or-
capital, could you pay for it?
Question.
Okay.
But we
if-
can replace the equipment.
If life safety, right, is for life safety, working cash is, you can use that for life safety and capital. But you can't use the life safety for capital. What's the advantage of getting life safety? Why wouldn't you always get the working capital?
The advantage of doing life safety is there's no 30-day petition period. So even though to all of us, to board members and people who have an interest in the school district, or maybe have kids coming up into the school district, or know the issues we deal with of not having any fields, someone out there, if 10% of the voters were to dispute those working cash bonds, that has to become a referendum question. With life safety, as long as the state approves the amendment and says this is qualified life safety work, we're able to issue those bonds without any kind of objection.
That was my question.
I spent a lot of time with these two, so it's come a long time.
You're doing a good job. Just to get back to the difference between option 3A and 3B, option 3A is designed to keep the tax impact very minimal on the taxpayer. Tim, before you got here, we're talking about the refunding, how strong the refunding savings is for this fall, we're looking at almost $3 million of savings over 10 years to the taxpayers. So as we look at adding in the life safety and maybe a working cash, we want to, in option 3A, keep the impact pretty neutral to the taxpayer. And that is what you get if you look on the far right column. It may be a penny increase in out 5 years or so, but the dollar amount over those 10 years is only $63, only $8 or so in many of those years. But we're paying off the life safety and working cash, over 14 years. And in our conversations in the past, we've kind of wanted to keep it around 7 years. But the other thing to note is that still when those referendum bonds are paid off in 2026, that tax rate drops in this case because you'll still have some life safety working cash bonds out, 50 cents instead of 55 cents. The savings on that $300,000 home in that case is about $454, because we're talking about the referendum bonds are, when they're gone, they're gone. They can't be reissued unless the district determines to go to the voters for another bond. Page 13 is just a graphic of that, and you can see the orange bars are the working cash and the light blue bars are the life safety, and how they kind of go out there to 14 years to the year 2030 tax years. The gray bars again are the savings from the refunding. Contrast 3A with 3B, the final option. This pays off the working cash and life safety, within that 7-year period through 2023. And so the advantage of that is the interest cost is lower. If you compare the two spreadsheets, you've got about $900,000 to $1 million less in interest for the two issues. The interest rates, instead of 2.8 on the working cash, is 2.16. Instead of 3.34 on the life safety, it's 2.22. So you have lower interest cost, but because we've got $5 million paid off in 7 years, it is not completely offset by the savings, the $295,000 a year from the refunding. So you have a small net increase of about 7 or 8 cents for the first 6 years, then it goes to 0, and then you have savings in the last 3 years. So all told, over those 10 years, it's a net $300 increase to the home. So just wanted to show you those different payback schedules. The advantage of A is that it's pretty much tax neutral to the taxpayer, but you have a higher interest cost because it's a 14-year payback, versus option 3B has the shorter payback, 7 years, but you've got a small increase to the taxpayer in those first 6 years.
Let me ask two questions on it. If I compare page 12 to 14, 3A to 3B, in the right column you say the impact on the home at the total. In 3A it's $63, and 3B it's $303. So in theory, if I just compare those two numbers, it's actually going to cost the taxpayer $240 more for the shorter period of time. If I just look at that, but
yeah.
you also don't show what the effect is in the last 4 years.
That's
on
correct.
That.
What I don't show, yes, is after the big drop, when the referendum bonds are paid off, I don't show that there is going to be additional, they're going to still continue to pay about $700,000 or $800,000 a year on the remaining life safety bonds.
Right.
So we're just looking at that 10-year period
Okay.
for comparison. That's a good point.
That's a good point. That's why I wanted her to put it on the bottom, at least so someone can see after 2026 they're going to get some saving, regardless of what we do.
Yeah, back on page 14, the drop is 55 cents when those bonds are paid off, only 50 cents in option 3A, because of course we have to continue the payments for 4 years on the life safety and working cash. So, these options are put out there for you guys to just think about, what options you might have, considering which projects you prioritize and want to take advantage of. I will reiterate what Dr. Skinkis has said. We've got low interest rates and you've got a super strong bond rating. which you're to be congratulated on in your conservative financial management to keep that AA+.
Liz, is there a reason why we chose 3? It's the one, I mean.
3 million?
Yeah. Is that just a number you came up with, just I mean, if we did 2 million,
We could do 2 million.
or if we did 2 million, 4 million in
4
total, just
million.
working cash? Because we know we have
You
2
sure
million
can.
roughly in life safety.
Is that
Yep.
what the number is, Gary? 2 million?
Well, those are options for you tonight. We can just
That
talk
we're
about those
discussed
a little
tonight.
bit.
But we're roughly around 2 million. And then we got, that would give us 2 million of flexibility to possibly do a long-term agreement with the zoo and then have, you know, roughly $1 million of that of that remaining to then fix the field. You know, we're kind of remember that if we were able to get the fields, we got to figure out how we're going to fix all the ruts and the gravel they put down for a walkway and redoing fencings and diamonds, and so make sure that kids they're safe to play on. It's safe for kids to have class on. So we'd have to save some of that for that, but
Yeah, so if you do the 2 million and 2 million, 4 million altogether of those two options, so the 3A option,
But if we did anything greater than the 3 and the 2, we really couldn't do anything greater under the 7-year time frame because you hit the max capacity. Did you not? You're showing us hitting max borrow, right? Because I'm
on
looking
the
there and I'm
short
seeing the remaining
payback,
is like
on the
3.
short payback, you
Yeah,
got
on
it.
7
short
years.
payback.
So we went a short payback.
We're hitting the max, right?
Yeah.
You're using up the debt base, so you can't pay off
I mean, is it
any
better
more
off to
than-
do the, I mean, I'm just thinking out loud, again, 3 and 2, so that if we don't need that extra million, we abate it and back
I
to the
think-
taxpayers, and you have that.
Right, but I think one of the discussions we have to have is do we want to have the taxpayers have an opportunity to come and discuss? Because if we did it all life safety, they're not going to have an opportunity. Well, we're kept kind of with the life safety.
Mhm.
But if we're going to go with the working cash, it gives the taxpayers an opportunity to come in front of us and see what their beliefs are one way or the other, to come and talk and
The
discuss it.
schedule allows for that, though.
You would have to have. a
Right,
hearing, yes.
yeah, right.
You have to have the hearing, that's part of it.
Right. But if you put it all into working cash, and we get a negative,
Well, you couldn't put it all you could put is 2 million. That's the max you could put in working, I'm sorry.
right,
Life safety.
right, you guys were
cash.
discussing putting it all in working cash.
Right.
And if
Well,
we get
you
a
have-
negative outcry, then we're gonna have to go back and say, well, we need life safety.
Well, we can approve the amendment tonight. Carrie can submit the amendment. If the state approves the amendment, it's on record that it's been approved by the state. If we chose in the 30-day petition period and not to issue the life safety bonds, we're not obliged to have to do it, are we?
You are.
Once you submit the amendment and the state approves it, you have to go get life safety bonds?
That's what you're asking for. I'd have to amend it. I'd have to resubmit and say, no, we're not going to do this.
We're going to use alternative sources of funding.
Correct.
Is that as long of a wait period?
That would depend upon their schedule. I couldn't speak to that.
Well, I got to say, Gary, we have to have our discussion on the life safety, but if we think as a board we should submit, we should do this life safety work, I think we're doing the right thing by issuing life safety bonds, because and actually, I'm concerned if we don't submit it, that we're are we taking a risk now that we think there's life safety, but because of there's different alternative fundings, we're not going to submit it to the state? We talked about that with the stands out here, that every year we failed the review from the state on the condition of our stands, and we did it for years. So there's a reason that the law allows you to issue the life safety bonds without having the
Objection.
constituents raise it, because in theory it needs to be done. And if you have the capacity to do it, which we do, because we're in pretty strong financial condition, that's why the law allows it. So I'm be on the fence on the other thing, of whether if we decide to do working cash, whether we should do tax exempt or taxable, because it limits what you do. But if we think we need to do life safety, I would strongly push for doing life safety bonds.
A lot of districts don't do that, don't do life safety bonds because they don't want to deal with this process.
Okay.
That is really
They don't want to deal with the state coming back and saying,
Right.
because when the state looks at a project, they look at a project throughout the state.
Right.
So school down south,
Cost X
it's
amount
not
of
paying
dollars.
what we're paying a square concrete,
Right.
you know.
There's a lot of back and forth. I mean, they communicate with us on a regular basis, asking questions. So once I submit this, there'll be back and forth. There was quite a bit last time we submitted.
Right.
And this, you're absolutely right, this is the process you've been utilizing.
Are there any questions for Liz? I'm going to ask Liz to stay while Carrie does her presentation, just so if other questions need to be bounced back to Liz.
And
Are
then
you-
after Carrie,
have you
we can
completed
maybe
your
come back to the
presentation?
schedule.
Okay. Are we good with Liz for the time being?
That's all good?
Yeah.
Good.
Good. Thank you, Liz. It was very helpful.